All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Legal and Policy Committee meeting. Do we need a roll call, Mrs. Perkins?
No, Ryan, we don't take normal roll call, but I'll definitely record our board members present.
Committee meeting.
Okay. And we'll definitely get those recorded.
Got it. Okay. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for being here so we can get started with our policy meeting. Ryan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll get us kicked off, and then we do have some guests with us here tonight, and we'll call them resident experts. And and we'll detail some of this, and a lot of it, I'm sure you've checked your package, has been well researched, and we really appreciate that. So just a quick review tonight. We've got our meeting summary from a previous meeting, but then we do have an elevated topic of Title IX and the federal requirements as it relates to that, and some deadlines. So we'll need to review that in detail, take some action on Monday night. And that's our guest speakers of Diana Feidel and Dan Rambler, as well as Kathy McVeigh, I see it on, and our superintendent. And then we have a Neola update, and I'm sure you've seen these updates, but we're going to start to embed these into our agenda. And that's the second item, subject 2.02, and really appreciate Mary Perkins putting this together so that the board, legal and policy committee can see exactly what's being assigned to our staff and when we receive it. And I think Dr. Akbar and Mr. Alexander, this is just another level, I think, of transparency and additional due diligence we're adding into our policies, and it's a nice document. So we appreciate that from Mary Perkins.
Yes.
And then we have 4.01, which is a status report of proposed new racial equity policy. Again, Mrs. Feidel has done a lot of research there that we'll detail, and then we can conclude with any other options to discuss that you might have. So I don't have a big piece tonight, so I'll be taking some notes. And if it's okay with you, Dr. Akbar, Mr. Alexander, I will turn it over to Diana Feidel and Dan Rambler for the update on Title IX.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. Mrs. Feidel, Mr. Rambler?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So I think I'll start, if that's okay, just with providing a little bit of an overview of the logistics and what the new Title IX regulations are, so that we can kind of move forward from there. And then maybe after that overview can take any questions that might come up before we go into any more detail. But what we have before this committee today is a draft policy about new Title IX regulations that are going to become effective August 14th. These regulations came out in May of this year, but unfortunately they were 2,000 pages long, and we and all school districts did not get a draft policy from Neola regarding the new regulations until like the middle of July. So since we've gotten that policy, we've gone through all our internal channels to go through, review it, learn it, understand it, digest it, select the necessary options and edits with the approval of various senior staff members, and have gotten to the point of the policy that is in front of you right now. Now, just to remind you that the board pays for the services of Neola, and those services include ensuring that any new policies that need to be passed are written by a team of experts, and they're guaranteed to satisfy those basic minimum guidelines of any new state or federal law, which is why it's important that we follow what Neola gives the board so that we get our money's worth and have that security that our policies will be compliant after we go through our own internal review process. You've gotten some legal alerts from Neola that this is coming. They were under a tremendous time crunch, just like all school districts and universities are, in getting this implemented. It's a pretty steep and unreasonable timeline, to be quite honest, especially given that it came out right when school was going on summer break. So everyone's in the same boat and everyone's sort of scrambling to make sure that everything gets done and is in place in time for that August 14th deadline. So that's a little bit about like the logistics and where we are. Because of the tight timeline that the federal government has placed on all educational institutions that receive federal funding, this policy will need to go to board on Monday evening, and we'll need to, where all the readings will have to be waived so that we can have a final policy passed by that Monday night meeting so that we can have it posted and sent out by the August 14th deadline, which is the Friday following the next board meeting. And that's just unfortunately where we are on this one. I think it's important to remember that no policy is set in stone, that, you know, if the board would want to revisit this in more detail like we normally do, that's obviously something that we can continue to do after that August 14th deadline. Of course, we can't amend it to make it so it's no longer compliant with what the new federal regulations are, but it certainly needs to, you know, we can still talk through it more because given that there's sort of, we only have one committee meeting to review it and then one board meeting to review it and get it passed in time to meet that deadline. So that's where we are on that. A little bit about the content of the new regulations. I will tell you that they have been viewed as a little controversial. There's quite a bit of litigation pending about the new regulations, and even some important court cases that could actually put a hold on the implementation of the regulations. And there's already been hearings and motions, and courts are reviewing that right now. And a ruling could come down tomorrow saying that the regulations, you know, should not be implemented nationwide. So we're also keeping our eye on that. But until a court tells us otherwise, this will be the law of the land. This is the law of the land and needs to be implemented accordingly. The big change here is that Title IX is now defining sexual harassment in a very detailed manner, and the school board will have to abide by making sure that we are viewing Title IX complaints under that new definition of sexual harassment. So the policy goes through what that new definition is. The other component of the policy is that it lays out a pretty prescriptive grievance process. So anytime anyone were to make an allegation that they've been subject to sexual harassment, there would be a review to see if that complaint falls under the Title IX definition. And then from there, there's a pretty elaborate grievance process that the school board would have to do. And it would start with doing an investigative, sort of an investigation by one person that would go through, that would make sure, you know, both sides have all the information, that they could be represented by an advocate, whether that's an attorney or a confidant or a parent or a school counselor throughout the process. The investigation, it's very prescriptive on how making sure it's fair and equitable for both the person filing the complaint and the person responding to the complaint. From there, the investigator will write a detailed report summarizing the evidence, but not making a conclusion. That report then goes to a different individual who is the decision maker, and they will make a decision about whether or not that complaint does meet the definition of sexual harassment, and issue findings to both parties regarding that. And then after that process, there is an appeal process that may be available depending on what the basis for the appeal is, and that's all contained in the policy. And then a separate person would review that appeals process. So the Department of Education has taken painstaking efforts to make sure that there's a more prescriptive framework to ensure that anytime these complaints come in, there's a fair, unbiased, and neutral process to make sure that they are resolved in a particular manner and that there is some finality provided to them. So that's a little bit about the grievance procedure. It's important to note that Title IX applies to student complaints in addition to employee complaints as well. So this would encompass really anything, and even complaints against third parties like vendors or contractors. So it really does encompass the majority of our school community. In addition to this new definition, the grievance procedures, the new regulation also has some training requirements for the people that will be the investigators and the decision makers. And it also includes some notice requirements, which is pretty standard anytime there's a new policy, about posting it, sending it out to people so they understand this is the updated policy. And then the final piece is some record keeping. And I think this will be something that I think aligns with a lot of the board's principles on keeping better track of sort of all types of harassment, discrimination complaints. And that is that, the district will have to keep not only records about how many complaints they receive in a year, but also all the documents associated with investigating those complaints, whether they're formally investigated, informally investigated, or ultimately dismissed for one of the reasons that's allowed under the policy. And those records also need to be retained for a certain period of time. So there'll be more transparency in terms of how we keep our records regarding Title IX investigations as well. So with that, I'll stop there. I saw Dr. Akbar, I believe you had a question. And then obviously if Mr. Rambler or Ms. McVeigh have anything else to add, I would welcome that as well.
Yeah, excuse me. So I just had a question and you're probably going to answer it. But if I'm understanding the process and how I read the policy, I only saw Kathy and Daniel's names in there. So I'm wondering, it sounded like you said there's 3 people. So there's one investigator, there's one decision maker, and then there's one person that is appealed to. So if I'm understanding the tree correctly. So who's playing each role?
Right. So the only people we have to identify in our policy and in our notice is who our Title IX coordinator or coordinators are. It can be more than one person. And so there was a decision to choose someone from human resources because, like I said, these complaints can include employee issues, and then someone from student services because it can also include student issues. So those are the only 2 people that need to be identified in the policies. So that's why they're the only 2 identified. There's some overlap permitted regarding, a Title IX coordinator can also be an investigator. So there's some overlap in there, but the recommendation is as far as who will fill those other roles is twofold. One, we'll have other people from human resources and from student services who are trained and able to perform an investigative function or a decision maker function if that's what's needed. And then the other thing that the district would be doing is using third parties, neutral third parties, to also be a part of the process as well. One of the tenets and principles behind a lot of these regulations are avoiding conflicts of interest. And so it can also be difficult to do everything in-house just because we all know each other, we're all involved in things. So we've talked a lot about having third parties be part of the investigation process as well, and would start by looking at some of the law firms that are already approved to do work with the district. And that's something that is already part of the district's practice under Title VII and our anti-harassment policy and that procedure. So that would align not only with these regulations, but also with board practices in the past.
Okay. So it sounds like it's still under review and kind of construction. So at some point, whenever it's decided, maybe we can get that like tree of who's doing what.
Sure. So I think who's doing what's probably going to change depending on all the circumstances too. The board has the flexibility to respond to these complaints as long as the people working on those are, verified people who are part of the Title IX coordinators team and they're trained and have the ability to delegate to. So I don't think there's necessarily going to be one set of people that will always be in each specific role. I think a lot of it's going to depend on the situation.
Right, but I guess what I'm requesting to see, like when you have the person who it gets appealed. So the other piece of it is you're going to have to be able to explain this to people, right? And there should be something that we give to people who either are thinking about filing a complaint or just general organization orientation for that this is out there. Obviously, we don't want anybody to do anything, but we also want people to feel comfortable enough to say something if they do feel like this has happened to them. So what I'm asking is, like, there could be appeal people. So there's a group of people who are responsible for appealing. So it could say one of these people will be assigned to you know, that if you appeal, one of these people will be the people who will appeal. And if you file, one of these people will be the investigators, and then and then not the same person if they're in both places, but one of these people, but not the same person, would be, you know, the decision maker, so that it shows people clearly the process. That's what I'm asking. I'm not saying that it has to be one name in each box.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't even need to be a name even if it was very clear that which I don't think is the case in this situation, but if all the investigators were all in human resources, if it said staff from human resources, for example, and all of the people that are appealed to goes through, I don't know, one of the superintendent or assistant superintendent, for example. So people can see what that process is. I'm not sure if it's going to be that, you know, kind of cut and dry, but that's what I'm thinking.
So Diana, this is Bruce. I have a couple of questions. I want to just clarify what Dr. Akbar is saying. So Dr. Akbar, what you're basically saying is there's going to be, Mrs. Fido was saying there's going to be a group of people who are going to be trained, correct? And so those people are going to be trained. We're asking for that list of people and what departments they're from. Is that what we're asking for? Because I think that would be appropriate that we as board members get a list of all those who have been trained in this here and what departments they're in, so we could have that. I'm not sure that's kind of saying as well, but.
Yeah, we can absolutely get you that list. And I will tell you that that list will be probably a breathing list, right? I mean, I think there's a need to get initial people trained. And then that list can grow and change as we work through this process, figure out how many complaints we're going to field under these new regulations. And I think the other thing that would need to be included in the list is any third parties that we might ask to help us, because I think depending on the volume of complaints and the complexity of them, that will be a necessary part of this process and is authorized under the new regulations and the proposed board policy as well.
Right. Yeah, because those individuals should be a part of that entire list. It should be a list of those who have been trained, those who maybe are coming from the other law firms that we're going to be using. Anyone who's going to be probably part of that process, that we get a list of all those names and where they're from. If they're from Akron Public Schools, Human Resource, then it's from Human Resource. From Student Services is from a law firm, all those. So we'd have a list of all those individuals.
Will do.
Okay. And then I had a question too. You said we have to vote on this on Monday's meeting, so we can meet the deadline, because the deadline is that Friday, I believe it is next Friday.
Yes.
So, and once we approve that, you said there's no amendments at that time. If we wanted to make some amendments, will we be able to make those amendments at a later date if we see that we want to make some amendments, but we just make them after we vote? We have to wait for a little while, and what is the period of time that we may have to wait if we wanted to make amendments? Not saying we are, but if there was something that need to be amended.
Sure. So there's no, you could start right away. We just need an updated policy in place by the 14th. And then if you want to start the process immediately of making amendments and changing it, you can start that right away. It's just that there's a lot in this particular policy that can't be amended. The regulations are just very prescriptive, and the policy has to say what the regulations say. So on this particular policy, there's little wiggle room for amending certain provisions. With that said, though, I mean, any suggestions or ideas or things like that, we can certainly consider and give you guidance on whether or not that's something that, you know, we can change, or we can't, or we can change it, but only this way, and things like that. So it'll be a little more of a burdensome process to amend this one, just given how prescriptive the regulations were.
Right. Okay. And then my last question, someone else can ask questions if they have. The other board members, we haven't sent this to the other board members. Will they get this here so they can have it to at least kind of peruse through a little bit before Monday? So I think it'd be fair to let them have that.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And
okay.
You're welcome.
If I could step in just to add a couple things, as Diana was saying too, the issue is that the regulations are pretty prescriptive. I think she was using that word a couple of times, and we've tried to make sure that the selections we made were specific to those regulations and those specifics that we have to follow per federal law. The other thing I would say too, just from the student side of it, we've always had Title IX issues that have come up with students. I think Title IX goes back to the early 70s. It's just the changes have made it incredibly more specific based on what the federal law is now and what the requirements are through the federal government. But we've always had a process of the investigation and then a decision being made. It's just these lines and these details are absolutely specific now, and we just have to make sure we're following those so we meet the federal requirements.
I just have a quick question. Diana, you mentioned the controversy and some of the cases that are surrounding some of this, and it might be a laundry list, so you certainly don't have to list them out, but can you maybe just talk about the basis for a few of the complaints that have been filed? And
Sure. So, and I haven't read through all the complaints in detail, full disclosure.
Sure.
But I mean, my understanding is the gist of the arguments is that a lot of victim rights organizations think that these specific regulations overly favor the accused than the person reporting the allegation of sexual harassment. So I know there's, the Department of Education standpoint is that's not the case. They're just trying to make it very fair and equitable for everyone. But, my understanding is a lot of the victim rights groups are saying, no, this is putting a lot more, protecting the accused a lot more than the accuser. And then I know another part of the litigation that's pending also asked for an extension because schools can't meaningfully process and implement these regulations because of the pandemic and because of the timing in which they came out, which was the end of one school year and then an expectation to comply before the beginning of another school year, which is obviously very difficult especially for a K-12 type institution. So those are, I know, are the two main things that are pending before the court right now. And the big lawsuit that most people are watching was brought by state attorney generals from a number of states across the country. Ohio is not included. It seems to be mostly Democratic states that are that signed on to the lawsuit.
Okay. And I have seen some of the controversy in the news just around, but it mainly applied, I think, to colleges and universities. But yeah. So
with respect to colleges and universities, my understanding is the impetus of the Trump administration's U.S. Department of Education implementing these regulations stems from what's called a Dear Colleague letter that the Obama administration issued about kind of cracking down on sexual assaults on college campuses. And there was a belief that Dear Colleague letter, which is only it's informal guidance, it's not binding law, was too one-sided in favor of the person making a complaint or allegation. So the current administration, U.S. Department of Education, thought that needed to be reined in and reworked, and a more equitable process needed to be put in place. And so that's how we got to where we are today.
And Mr. Bravo, I would echo what Diana said. That is most of the issues is one, the schools being anxious about the time requirements, but then there are a number of concerns from victim rights advocates. And I would say Diana's point about the Dear Colleague letter is absolutely right. We've essentially seen a shift from one direction to a completely opposite direction. And when you read through it, it feels a certain way now, and it feels very defending of the person being accused now. And there's a lot of other stuff we could say about all that and the feelings on all that, but at the end of the day, it's federal law and we have to follow it. And so we're going to follow it, but also do everything we can to support all of our kids. Or staff members, I'm sorry. I always look at the kids side. I'm sorry, Kathy.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other? Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan, go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. Any other questions for Dan or Diana in regards to next steps? I know Dr. Akbar, you had a question about the roles and investigators. Was that sufficiently answered in something that when we kind of deliver the final product here Monday and the outreach, that's something that we can keep you connected to? I think Diana said that we can produce the list of those who are going to be receiving the training and throughout. So let's pause, make sure that we've got all the questions answered. Or you've had.
Yeah, Ryan, go ahead. I do have one more question. What is the time frame for the training of this, Diana? Of those who are going to be trained for this?
They'll be trained by August 14th.
Okay, by August 14th. Okay.
Yes, and then so in addition to getting those core group of people trained on like sort of the very specifics of the policy, there will also be district-wide training. But that will be done as we can fit. I mean, hope the sooner the better, but there's no requirement that training all be done by August 14th. So there's already some training in our Safe Schools program that we can use to push out to all staff to make sure they understand the new regulations and how to respond to someone who makes a report, where to report, sort of more big picture type training. In addition, every employee and family, the notice will be sent to everyone of the new policy. So that will also kind of give everyone an idea. And then Mr. Rambler and myself will also be talking to all the principals at their sort of training and professional development before the school year starts to make sure, they understand what this is, what's going on, if they have any questions, so on and so forth.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
I would just throw out one more thing procedurally, though I think everybody knows this, but I know we've got at least 4 board members on the call. I think whenever you guys do your committee report, then we typically will take 2 votes. You guys will recommend approval of this policy as it's submitted, and you'll ask for a motion to waive the 3 readings. And so then I'll ask for a motion to waive the 3 readings, and we'll vote on that. And then we'll ask for a motion to approve the policy itself.
Thanks, Patrick.
Okay, Ryan?
Okay, I've taken some notes there just on that, that item. Sorry about that. Thanks, Diane and Diana, for the review. Was there, on subject 2.02, the Neola update, has everybody had a chance to see that? And anybody, I can actually present that. Just we'll do that, because I don't think that'll take a long time here. I'd like to show that because it is a nice addition to our committee meetings. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. And so anytime that Neola has an update, it could be just a citation update, it could be a date removed, or just any other nominal change, they will send us updates. Tend to give us more substantial information in writing, like policy 2270 there in the middle of the screen, policy 2431 and interscholastic athletics, where they give us a little bit more background. And they send those out, and our policy has been is to send those to the staff members, administrators that oversee that direct area, much like what you see tonight with Dan Rambler in his area. We get those those changes and or suggestions back through the board legal and policy committee. But I really like what Mary has put together here, and then has assigned it to the appropriate staff member. So just wanted to run through that so you could see. We can even include this in your, monthly write-up to the board as to if we get a question about the interscholastic athletics as it relates to some future discussions that were coming up in front of the board, and policies being changed, especially in remote learning environments, we can be prepared to do so. So thanks again, Mary.
I think that would be a good idea to have that for all the board members. We include in our report, but also they can all get a copy of that as well.
Great.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So specific to the Scout intercollegiate or interscholastic, I think is what it says. And now I got to find the actual tab because, 2341 interscholastic athletics. So it starts out by saying that it needs to have a minimum GPA requirement, and then it has fall scholarship eligibility, and it says something about the due range. I don't understand. They seem to be in conflict somewhat, so I'm trying to figure out what is the actual change.
This is a summary of Neola policy changes. Much like I think what we've done here recently is give you a red line and strikeout version either in Google Docs or in Word. And so that's part of the process now that between Mary and the administrator will start to detail. So I don't know the actual.
Oh, okay, got it.
This is very early on in the process to get the board in tune and do a better job communicating with you guys about what's coming.
Got it. That makes more sense.
Okay, great. And it's definitely a work in progress here. So we've definitely built this up a little bit. I really do like this process now.
Yeah. Now, can I ask one more question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up my agenda for the next agenda item, which is the proposed new racial equity policy. So go ahead, Dr. Akbar.
Okay, so at the end of the, I guess, summary that you sent, it talks about remote learning and that there's not an approved policy on that. Can you, since there's nobody assigned to that, can you tell me what that's about, or what's the plan for moving forward? Is it that we're going to create a policy for that? But can you give me more details on that? Because I know it says that plans for remote learning has to be adopted by July 31st, which we did, and then sent to DOE, but I didn't know if there was anything else we needed to do.
No, House Bill 164, as it says,
ODE.
Yeah, ODE requires us to submit that plan. And so I'm assuming, and I'll let the superintendent correct me, I'm assuming that the submission of our plan by July 31st is completing that requirement by the department to say which model we are learning, which learning model we are using, the attendance requirement. So I think this is, as I read through this is going to interact with many of our board policies.
Correct.
Which is, I'm reading now the last section. So House Bill 164 just requires us to submit this plan in writing to the Department of Education. It may or may not amend our current policies. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this is very much a lagging process, unfortunately, where a lot of the changes are being handed down, like what Diana and Dan just reviewed, in short amount of time, and we're having to respond to them. So I think maybe, Dr. Akbar, your suggestion or question raises something we should probably add to say to the current attendance policies, online documentation policies, and obviously to equitable distribution and our professional development. Do our current policies meet the requirements of House Bill 164? I think we'll review that also.
Yeah, and it says at the very bottom also that we're required by OAC, which I don't know what OAC means off the top of my head.
Ohio Administrative Code.
Okay, so by that we need to have a blended learning policy as well. So just things that that kind of jumped out at me that I'm not sure if we have one currently, and I know we're not going to blended learning, but it looks like we need to have one anyway. So just thought that as we are looking at all the policies that's coming down the pike, are there a few more around remote learning and blended learning that we need to consider?
So when these get assigned likely to Dr. McWilliams-Woods' team, we'll start to give regular updates to those. We'll make sure that gets added to the notes.
Okay.
Ryan, it sounds like in here that we're going to have to probably look at a couple of policies to make sure they're updated and see if there's any changes we need to do as far as those when it comes to remote learning. And is that what we're saying as well?
Sure does. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. We're on to 4.01 on the proposed new racial equity policy, and we have research and memo from Diana Feidel. Do you want to take it from here?
Sure. Yeah. So at the last meeting, there was discussion about everyone kind of looking at different policies and doing their own research. So I tried to compile everything as best I could of example policies that are out there. My thought process was, one, I first wanted to kind of give the board an overview of what the Ohio urban school districts are doing. And the answer is unfortunately not much. So you can kind of see that, and then went into some of the out-of-state school districts, some of these board members have mentioned, some that I'd found on my own, and just kind of put them in one document to give you something to review and think about. I think, I would propose that this committee decide sort of if there's a template among what's been compiled that you think, or maybe it's a combination of two policies that you think would be a good place to start. And then we can maybe put that together as like a draft policy, and then kind of go through our regular process of, assigning a team, having them review it, going back and forth between this committee and that team on like how to develop the policy. So that's kind of why I put this together, and the thought process behind, hopefully us something to start from, so we're not necessarily writing anything from scratch. So hopefully that makes sense. And if you have questions.
I think it does. And Bruce and I had, it's probably an hour-long conversation about this and what we wanted to do. I know we both have some pieces and parts, and I think that we were going to put it together, and then maybe we'll send that to you.
That's fine.
But to add to that, one of my, I think there's two policies that I like that as good starting points, as well as the additional things that I'm working on around equity protocol to be added. But St. Paul had a pretty good one that you added in your document. And I don't know what page it's on, so I can try to find it really quickly. But
I'll give you an exhibit number. It says it's exhibit 6, so it would probably be in the middle of the attachments.
okay, yes, okay. I'm like, I don't remember where it was, but I remember reading it. And then there's one that's not in here that I did find, and now I don't. It is Louisville's, I think.
So that's in here. It maybe there's more than one though.
Jefferson County, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that one has been an exemplar. I think a lot of people have, from what I've seen, have used that. I was talking with Carla about that one as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry. For some reason I forget they're on the county system.
County
So
system.
I was trying to look for Louisville really quickly, and I was like, I know it. I've seen it before. But yeah, so those are the two. I think that if we had a blend of the two models, and this is my personal opinion, Bruce may disagree, and maybe Val or Patrick may disagree too, but I think those are good starting places.
And I wanted to comment on that because Diana, thank you for getting those first of all. But some of those I had already looked at when I was doing our equity policy, and those are more. Most of them are more equity policies there, and you have a little bit of some racial equity built into it. But I think what Dr. Akbar and I were talking about is a more or less a standalone policy and dealing with issues with racial equity and some of the things that have been implanted for a long time. And the school district to me that had the most, and I thought was a pretty decent policy, was St. Paul as well. Now that's a more or less real equity policy. The others are just pieces to me of equity policies, but that's a true equity policy because it talks about the issues, the systemic piece. It talks about what we need to do. It talks about the teams. It talks about everything, learning, all of that is in there. And that to me is a true racial equity policy. The others are more or less equity policies that were just kind of had racial equity embedded in them. So that's totally different to me. I mean, and the district may want to do something like that, but I personally think it needs to be a standalone policy, and it may hit on some other aspects. And it would become part of equity as well, but I think that needs to be more in depth like St. Paul's is.
I agree. The only thing that I would really add that is not there that we really need to be very ever present in is the hiring and recruitment and retention. That's not there. I think those are 3 areas we definitely need to include. And then the last thing I'll say is around discipline.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Dr. Akbar. Those are parts that need to be in there too. And when I look at the racial equity policy and kind of going back when we talk about the equity policy, some of those things are part of that. And some of those things that are in the equity policy. When we talk about hiring, you talk about training, you talk about all these other things, that needs to be part, that should be part of the racial equity policy, just as it is in the equity policy. Okay, and so we need to have that included, and that includes, like you said, the hiring process and how we do things there. So training, all those aspects would be part of this policy, or should be part of this policy.
I would say equitable program equity, and I don't know what the metrics for that are yet, but over the years, and I've brought this up even in terms of like. When we've been looking at programs and things, or when we were looking at college and career academies, and as the different pathways applied to Bookdole, for example, and making sure as we were, taking things out like the nursing programs, that there was equity across programs, across buildings, so that it doesn't feel like and I know that's never the intent, of course, but making sure that program equity is there to protect against sort of the segregation of programs throughout our buildings, and making sure that doesn't happen, so that there's truly meaningful opportunities across all of our buildings. And I know we already all want that and strive for that, but I think that's an important piece to put in or to include in the policy. And then whatever the metrics are for that, and Ryan, we've talked about this throughout finance too, in terms of per pupil expenditures and building level sort of, I tend to call them sort of P&Ls, and I know that's not that's easier said than done, but you know what I'm talking about, where we're kind of measuring buildings too, and the cost of running those buildings and the cost of them and quality of the programs. And so I think there's a few different ways to measure it, but generally as a policy speaking, I think just equity in programs across buildings is important.
Yeah, we were turning the corner with those building level dashboards prior to COVID, and have just started to dust that off again in terms of per pupil expenditures now that we've closed fiscal books, and we're starting to head in that direction. So I'm looking forward to that work again with Finance Committee, because we definitely.
And NJ, I talked to you about this just a little bit. Oh, sorry, Ryan. I thought you paused, or maybe there's just a lag in my system.
Go for it.
NJ, I talked to you about this a little bit too, but as we're working with Ryan on the Forecast 5 piece, I think, one of the biggest barriers to equity is the ability to see the results. And I was sharing with NJ how even a few years ago, pre-Forecast 5, how we were really pushing for those dashboards and sort of what I was calling at the time sort of a flash report, where we could actually see real-time data and be able to view that at any time. And even the public could see some of that data, so that, equity is great, but only if you can see it, measure it, and see it real time and all of that. So I love that you're dusting off the dashboard ideas too, because I think that'll go a long way towards us being able to actually see equity in action.
Yeah, certainly we should be able to head there coming in this fall, I think. I'm looking forward to that work.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the equity policy?
I'll just say one thing, and this is something that Bruce and I talked about, that the equity decision-making tool or matrix will be good to go in both the racial equity and in the equity policies. And it may get to what Patrick just mentioned around being able to measure, what's happening on the program levels as well, when you make decisions to cut programs in certain areas, or what have you, when you're making those decisions.
Yeah, or where to add them to. I mean, we've got magnet programs around the district, and one of the things we talked about during College and Career Academies is making sure that we had enough of those sort of magnet pathways at all of our schools, that maybe it would balance the enrollment a little bit, because you would have people that would want to go to historically under-enrolled schools, specifically because there were attractive programs there. And I think that's important for those neighborhoods and those communities.
Yeah, I agree with that. And even so, like when we get those different type of grant programs or any type of outstanding opportunity for our district, to ensure that, like you said, Patrick, that we're not putting them all in the same schools, that we're, looking at how do we spread the wealth. So I do like that.
Yeah. And again, that's part of equity, looking at what is needed at each school, and we talk about what is needed to attract kids, what is good for the kids in specific schools and so forth. And I mean, equity takes a little bit of work, but when it's done and it's done properly, the kids benefit, and that's what we want, because if the kids benefit, the district's going to benefit, and that makes a big difference. Now you're winning, and so that's what we want to do, is win, especially with our kids. So that is just part of equity.
Great. Any other questions on the proposed new racial equity policy? We've got one more agenda item on 4.02 status report, proposed new policy for naming and renaming an APS facility. We've deposited some of the research that we've done up to this point, but I do not have an update. Likely will not have an update at least until September, when we are able to put some additional time into that. Are there any other comments or research that anybody on our team has done that they have in regards to that? I don't believe so. We haven't had this in our senior staff or executive team meetings, so I don't have an update on this one as of yet.
Okay. Ryan, there was some something sent out from the various school districts and talking about naming. I mean, like Toledo, Cleveland, Dayton, Columbus, Marysville, Forest Hill, Butler, Princeton, and Indianapolis, and so forth. I don't know. I'm not sure who actually sent that out, but that was some information that we got in reference to naming policies. But also, just so everyone is aware, when I kind of just threw this together just to get the ball rolling, I did look at Columbus, Dayton, and Cleveland. They had a little bit more in depth as far as when it came to naming, but there still wasn't as strong. And so there was other districts that I looked at outside of there, and there was I think I want to say Washington University as well. Looked at what they were putting together as far as their naming. So we're still wide open with this here. We still need to move forward with it when we can, as soon as we get more input and be able to get ready to put it to rest so we can have something. But those were all looked at as well, those school districts.
Thanks, Mr. Alexander. Yes, it is embedded. There is a link on your agenda that has all of the school district policies. And I'll work with the superintendent as we get closer to September, and we'll likely appoint an administrator over that to start to detail that a little bit more.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
And that's it for the agenda. Anything else for Monday night that you need?
Well, can we just mention, and I'll be sure to throw this out at Monday's meeting, that you got honored by ASBO, and not just by the Ohio Association, but ASBO International. That's a pretty prestigious thing. Congratulations.
Yes.
So is this like the pinnacle award for you, pun intended?
Yeah, it's all downhill. It's all downhill from here.
It's a downward slide from here. No, it was a nice surprise, and then otherwise everybody's got their kind of nose down in all their work and in COVID work. So it was a nice surprise, and thanks for all the nice comments that I got today.
Yeah, you've been working hard, Ryan, on a lot that for our district, and it needs to be known and shown has been appreciated, and not just for our district, but to represent our district statewide, and probably I'm sure it will go national too. But it's good to have someone like you doing the work that you're doing, because when we talk about wanting to be the #1 school district in the country, that's what we're talking about, and we have to do things like that if we're really sincere. So appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you and congratulations. Definitely.
I appreciate it.
Definitely.
All right.
No pressure of finding us any more money, though. No pressure.
That's tomorrow and Friday's committee meetings. So stay tuned to those too. All right. Well, I appreciate all the extra work from the staff on tonight. And Mary, thanks for putting in the extra time on the agenda detail. I think that's working out well. And to our guests, detailing these Title IX policies and getting them ready for the board. We appreciate it.
I only have one.
Thank you, Ms. Perkins.
Yes, thank you, Mary. I only have one other thing that I did not see on that list. And I don't know who it's going to be assigned to, but we talked about in our racism resolution to begin the process of establishing a employee resource group ERG policy. And I thought that as we're putting a list together of committees and policies and staff members to start formulating some information, we specifically didn't want to start that one without input from the staff. So can we get an update on maybe who might be in charge of that, and when can we expect at least information to start that process and maybe take that information to Diana, and we can, put some more meat on it. And I mean Diana Fidel, not Diana Autry.
Yeah, Carla's been working on that, and we'll have some additional information. I'll have her reach out to Diana as well.
So Carla did reach out to me already.
Oh,
and
perfect.
yeah, so we're talking. I asked Neola if they had any guidance for us on that. They told us that they did not. So we'll go through a similar process with the racial equity policies. We'll try and pull different policies like that from across and compile them, and we can give those to the board in sort of a similar format.
I know that in my office, Erica Glover has been working with Carla on that initiative as well, and they're in the process, if it's not already done, it's close, working on a survey to send out to staff in the district to see what types of groups we might people might be interested in. Because there's many different types of
right
resource groups, so they are working on it.
I appreciate that. So could we maybe put this out there to have Erica or Carla or both come and present preliminary information to us at our next meeting?
At the next policy committee meeting?
Yes, which will be in September.
Sure.
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Mary, can you add that to the agenda? I'm putting that in my notes as well. Wonderful. Thanks again for meeting tonight, and I'm sure I will see all of you in the next couple of days.
Yes, very good meeting. Anybody have anything else for the good order before we close? Going once, going twice. So if we're done, thank you, everybody. Appreciate everything you're doing. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
All right.